how many times I've gone to nursing homes or the hospital to cheer somebody up, and I'm the one who walks away more cheery because I feel like, oh my goodness, their example of accepting their suffering or just seeing their smile when you come into the room is gift. And so that's that whole reciprocal. So I think even outside of marriage life, we find it in every aspect of our relationships around us.
Welcome to the Be Filled podcast. Together, we will explore the deepest desires of the human heart and how our Creator wants to fulfill your every longing. Join us as we explore the beautiful teaching of St. Pope John Paul II on the theology of the body. We are so excited you're here on the journey with us. Open your heart to be filled. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Be Filled podcast as we continue to journey together through St. Pope John Paul II's teaching on the theology of the body. My name is Rochelle Parker, and today I'm here with two of my friends, Katie Davis and Sister Cecilia Ann. Patty isn't able to be with us today, but we know she's somewhere praying for us for sure. So we'll miss her today. This episode, we're going to continue the section of the text entitled Man in the Dimension of Gift. And today we're going to be taking a closer look at the Mystery of Original Innocence. And this is found in audiences 16:3 through 19:6. So Original innocence is really what we've been talking about all along. It really is the state that the first man and woman were in before original sin, before the fall. So far we've looked at the three original experiences kind of in a broader way, but here it seems like John Paul II is really zooming in on the relationship between the man and the woman so that we can see what makes it possible for them to live out this communion of persons. So as we get started, we are going to be looking first at audience 16:3 through 16:5. And here, John Paul II emphasizes that it is by God's grace that man is able to, what he says, participate in the inner life of God himself in his holiness. And it is this grace that is the foundation and source of his original innocence. And this innocence is a gift from God that allows the man and the woman to live in that reciprocal relationship of the disinterested gift of self. So the word disinterested here doesn't mean that they aren't interested in each other, but it means an unselfish gift. It's a really free giving of oneself without an expectation of a return. And so man and woman are given this purity of heart from God that allows them to see each other clearly and to understand the spousal meaning of the body. And so, ladies, as we get started, what were your initial thoughts on original innocence and this gift that God gives man? Sister, would you like to start?
Oh, sure. When I read it, again, it's all weaved together so well throughout the whole theology of the body. But when I was reading this and it talked about the innocence and everything, and then connecting it with the purity of heart, I just had an example that happened the other day. And again, I think that purity of heart always brings forth a true joy. And so I was over at one of the schools helping with lunch duty and everything. But this day I got there a little early, so I went down to the pre-K class, and they were just going out for races. So they asked if I'd join them, so I said sure. So I went out and got to see all the fun things. The little girl would take me by the hand to see the swings, and then to see the the merry-go-round or whatever. So it's fun. And then after a little bit, this other little girl came up, and she was holding these beautiful flowers. She wanted to give them to me, and it was just pure joy for this little girl. Well, they were weeds, there's nothing growing right now. But I just took it by that. How beautiful. Just such an innocent little soul. And she could just have such happiness bringing me these beautiful flowers. That I will not plant. Anyway, but it was just so beautiful. I thought that is part of that beautiful innocence, that purity of heart that just brings forth great joy. And I think God gives us glimpses of that throughout our life. And I think too, again, when I've had to or gotten the privilege of babysitting, my nieces and nephews, when they need you to feed them or to change their diaper, it's not that you're getting any great joy out of changing their diaper, but the innocence that it's that purity of heart, giving a gift, giving something that they couldn't do themselves, getting them a glass of water or food or whatever. That is just innocence. You're not in it for what you can get, like Rochelle said, is that disinterestedness, meaning that selflessness. So when you can just give because you're giving that gift totally innocently, that's coming from a real pure place in our heart. And it just naturally brings forth the joy. And we know the joy is also a sign of the Holy Spirit. And so it just shows that beautiful connection, that union you are having with God at that moment. So that's kind of what came to my mind when I was reading.
Oh, wow. You definitely made me think about when I was little. And we used to stand on the sidewalk and wait for people in our neighborhood to come by, and we too would hand them weeds. But I love the way you described it, and I can just imagine how joyful you were in accepting that gift as well, and making her feel so good. And I particularly remember one of the people who walked by, and we gave them the flowers, I guess we're calling them. And as he walked by, he threw them on the ground, and we were just heartbroken because he didn't accept our gift. Of course, we'll get into this a little later, but I think it is, both a gift to give and to have someone receive it so joyfully. So I love thinking about that image. And I think when I was reading this section, I was also just reminded of the context that this whole theology of the body was put into, where, John Paul II started this conversation, referencing the Pharisees, and, they were just wanting a yes or no answer on if it was okay to divorce, and he had to take them back to the beginning. And I think that he was really just reminding them of this original innocence, and that, he refers to the hardness of their hearts, how it's not so right now, but that we can all go back to that original innocence. And it's so important, even though we can't really obtain it here on earth, which Patty kind of referenced that last episode is like, oh, well, if we, my daughter said, if we can't obtain it, why should we even try? Well, we have to have something to strive for. Yes, we can obtain it here on earth, but we have to have something that we want to strive for, and we have the grace. And I love that quote that you said earlier, Rochelle, about this innocence is a gift from God to the human heart, and it allows both man and woman to exist from the beginning in the reciprocal relationship of the disinterested gift of self. I mean, that was just so beautiful to me. And I think that, the text goes on to say that one can define this beginning also as original and beautifying immunity from shame as the result of love. And so original innocence at its very roots excludes the shame of the body. And so one thing that Christopher West does in his class is he asks everyone, how many of us can look in the mirror without any clothes on and say, this is very good? And then everyone starts laughing in the class because nobody can do that. And so what he's describing really is our loss of original innocence. Mm-hmm. And so I think that really is the reason that John Paul II wants to spend time with this original innocence, is he's really later on going to link that to our happiness. And so I think it is really good just to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you both so much. That was wonderful. And sister, I loved that story too of the little girl. And that is such a great demonstration of what we're going to talk about next, about that exchange of the gift and that is just really powerful to see that kind of in everyday life, And then, Katie, the grace is what really stuck out to me too. And in Christopher West's commentary, he writes, what in Original Man radically eliminates any experience of shame? John Paul has a one-word answer: grace. Grace is God's self-gift to man. It is God's Spirit breathed into the dust of our humanity. And I just thought that was really powerful. I mean, it's always been His grace that allows us to truly live out the meaning of our bodies. And it continues to be His grace that allows us to do that. So that is a beautiful realization, I think. So the next part is about that exchange of the gift. And he really digs into that more deeply. Again, I kept imagining him zooming in on this relationship between man and woman and the reciprocal gift of self. And I actually ended up creating a few diagrams to demonstrate all of this movement happening. You've got what's happening. God is giving grace to man and woman, and then you have the relationship between man and woman, and just so many different dynamics. So I'm going to link that in the show notes if anyone else just is sort of a visual person and you need to be able to kind of see this and not just listen to it or just read it. So it's not fancy, but hopefully it can be helpful. But so some of this is review, what he goes over, but just to get a sense of the flow, he kind of goes through how this actually happens. So man and woman, because of this grace that God gives them of innocence, they're able to see the other and know that they are willed by God for His or her own sake. And they also have that consciousness of the spousal meaning of the body. And then because of that, they're able to then welcome each other and accept one another. And so they can become a gift to the other. So there's this reciprocal acceptance or welcoming of the other. And that is what creates that communion of persons. And John Paul II describes this as a participation in the eternal and permanent act of God's will. Wow. It is super powerful. Bet you guys didn't know you were doing that in your relationships. And then he goes on to describe how this exchange gets deepened over time between the man and the woman. And so the Creator gives woman to the man, man accepts woman as a gift, and woman then in receiving His acceptance, this is going to sound really crazy and you're going to understand why I need a diagram, but woman gives herself to the man and discovers her own gift through His acceptance of her. And then the man is then aware of his gift that he has to give and is enriched by it. And so it's like, sister, your example was so great because it's like the little girl discovered in giving you the weeds, like, I have the ability to make someone happy, yes. Right? And then you respond to that with such joy and appreciation, which then awakens in her again, that experience of like, oh, now I've been received. And so, it just kind of goes in a cycle. And it actually, John Paul II writes, giving and accepting the gift interpenetrate in such a way that the very act of giving becomes acceptance, and acceptance transforms itself into giving. So letting someone love you is a gift to the other person. And I hope that, I think we probably have some more examples because I think that's super important to be able to think of like actual real life examples. Otherwise, it just gets extremely confusing.
Yes.
But he says the exchange is reciprocal, and the mutual effects of the sincere gift and of finding oneself reveal themselves and grow in that exchange. So, yeah, it's a little bit dizzying, I think, but I think it's also very true if we can sort of latch on to our own experience. So, Katie, would you like to start in sharing your thoughts on this section?
Yes, I think it's very accurate to call it dizzying. I actually, before I saw your very linear, clean diagram. I had like written this spiral because I'm like, if woman is going to discover her gift, and that when man accepts her gift, then it's a gift back to her. I'm like, that's circular, but then it like does another circle. So I'm like, okay, now I'm spiraling. So
I actually
it's getting deeper.
Yeah, like I wanted to do the spiral. I honestly couldn't figure out how to do it on the program. So if someone knows how to do that,
Yes. So
that's very smart.
We need a graphic artist.
Please help
what
us.
We're saying. So, yes, I have a beautiful example of this, and it was actually the first year that Ruah Wood's curriculum was being put in at my daughter's school, and this was a few years ago now, but they were having just a lot of problems with nothing too big that I knew of, but just people excluding each other or not being kind to one another. And my daughter's teacher was so good at being in tuned to the little things, and she was able to create this beautiful experience for the class. And she, I still remember the day my daughter came home from school. She jumped in the car and she was holding this piece of paper like really tight to her chest. And you can tell like within 5 seconds of your child being in the car if they had a good day or a bad day. And I just knew she had a good day. And I said, oh, how was your day? Even though I already knew. And she was like, oh, it was great, Mom. We did this great activity. And then she hands me the piece of paper. And on the piece of paper were all these like beautiful, kind words about her. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful. And she was like, yeah, everyone in class, we wrote our name on a piece of paper, and everyone in class had to go around and write one thing that they liked about that person. And we did it for everyone. And by now I'm like tearing up because I know this is like theology of the body, and like it's working. And I said, wow, God has given you a lot of gifts that you were able to share with others. This is beautiful. And she said, I know, Mommy, and I found a lot of gifts in everyone else too, and I got to share that with them. And I'm like trying to drive at this point, and I'm just like, you're right. But, I just thought it was a perfect example of like Lizzie is finding herself more when other people in her class are pointing out the way that she is a gift to others. Mm-hmm. And by them writing down what they liked about her, she discovered the gift of herself more fully. And I think that it just goes back to that quote that the finding of oneself in one's own gift becomes the source of a new gift of self. I mean, Lizzie really received a new gift that day just by her peers recognizing what she had already given to them as a gift. And, Ruah Woods, a lot of times they have lots of testimonies of how just by implementing theology of the body in the classroom, like the behavioral issues get solved. And it's not addressing the bad behavior. It's addressing the gift that they can be to one another. And once they see that they are a gift and they feel the happiness of receiving that gift, they want to be a gift again and again. And one of the ideas they even had is like doing a gift of self award in the classroom. And so, every week they suggested you could recognize a student who is giving a gift of self. And Immaculate Conception is actually kind of doing this by the Shine Your Light Award, where they recognize how a student is shining their light. And I'm like, oh, that's totally theology of the body. So it was really, really nice to reflect on that.
That is beautiful. And I think, there's probably so many examples that we just miss, I think, when I was reading this too, I thought of, I live in community. And I think especially as a young girl, you enter religious life and you're not sure what it's all about. But very quickly you find out that the vows that you take aren't burdens. They are gifts, and they're gifts that help you become a gift to others. And I think communities so often, you have people, you're living vows of obedience. So they tell you, well, I'd like you to go teach here, or I'd like you to do that. And they often call out of you gifts you did not know you had. You know, I had never aspired to be a teacher. I wanted to be a CPA.
Oh,
anyway,
wow.
And so then they asked me, after I'd gone through initial formation, the question that I was asked is, what grades do you want to teach? And I thought, none. Anyway, so
Accounting 101?
Yeah. I'm not very tall. Maybe I should teach little kids. So my first semester of college, I had a human development class. And on Fridays, I helped out with, daycare. And it was the longest semester of my life.
Aww.
And I did not look forward to Fridays as that year, that semester. I realized my gift wasn't with littlest kids. I liked the kids, it wasn't my gift. And so then I was looking for older kids, and I found my niche in middle school. But I would have never even tried teaching if the community wouldn't have called out the gift. And I loved it. For 20 years I taught, and I loved every year of it, every minute of it. So it's one of those things, you think of the vow of chastity. It's not so much a burden of not being able to have my own family, it's being able to be a gift to all families, And in response, I receive, gifts from every family, being a part of their lives in so many different ways. The gift of poverty, too. At first, it can seem like, I don't get to own my car. I don't get, you know what? I don't. But it has become a gift because I don't have to worry about, keeping up with the Jones. I don't have to worry about having all kinds of different styles of clothes. I could change 5 times a day and I'd still look the same, so nobody would notice.
Sister, every time I look at my closet and I don't know what to wear anymore,
Yeah.
I'm like, I wish I was sister, and I could just put on
It'd be
the
so much
same
easier.
So it takes away so many things. So you start to look at things, how God gifts you in so many ways. So I think about that. Our whole lives are an exchange of gifts in so many different ways, definitely in marriage, in all kinds of friendships, just giving of your time to listen to somebody. How many times I've gone to nursing homes or the hospital to cheer somebody up, and I'm the one who walks away more cheery because I feel like, oh my goodness, their example of accepting their suffering or just seeing their smile when you come into the room is gift. And so that's that whole reciprocal. So I think even outside of marriage life, we find it in every aspect of our relationships around us.
That is so true. Wow, both of you. That was so amazing. And now I'm thinking of even more things. But what I was hearing, what you were sharing, sister, is like there's freedom in that, right? Like you're free to just give of yourself, and you're not constantly thinking, what can I get out of this? Because that's really kind of a burdensome way to live when you're constantly looking for like, what's in it for me? That's not happiness. And just a couple of days ago, in one of the gospel reading, was Jesus, promising that if we give, we will receive. And I just thought I'd read that. It said, Jesus said to his disciples, "Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed together, shaken down, and overflowing will be poured into your lap." And wow, how powerful is that? And not only did he preach that, like that's how he lived, right? He gave his life in the end, right? And he also said elsewhere that it's in losing your life that you find it. And so obviously he knows this. He is God. He created us. He knows how we're made. And so he spoke it and then he lived it and he showed us how to do that. And then of course I was thinking about, really praying with what does this look like in marriage and in family life as well. And I think the whole idea of just accepting each other where we are is huge. And I know for me, that's really directly linked to, how honest I'm being with God in prayer. If I'm being honest with myself and with him about where I'm struggling, and then I allow him to love me there, right? And receive me there, then I'm grounded and rooted in that love, and I can then offer that to someone else. But if I'm not in that space and I'm in a space of like, I'm looking for what you can do for me kind of thing, that comes out of insecurity, right? And not being fully rooted in love. And so I can see that in my marriage for sure. Like, I don't expect him to be perfect. He does not expect me to be perfect. We love each other where we are and receive each other there. And I know that when I'm vulnerable with my husband and he receives me, he then realizes he's able to give me that gift of acceptance where I am. And then that encourages him to also be vulnerable with me and share with me. And so again, it just goes on and on, deeper and deeper. And then, when I'm weak, my husband sees that and he's able to give himself and step in. Right?
Yes.
Fill in where I am not able, to step up. So, which then when I let him do that, he feels his worth, right? He sees like, I have a place. This is my vocation. I'm received. I'm accepted. I'm respected, which then leads him to want to give more. I just can see that happening, and I'm so grateful for that. And I think that it ultimately points us to our relationship with God and the kind of relationship he wants with us too, right? Like to be vulnerable in our prayer and let him love us and forgive us, and that he'll fill in, where we're weak, right? And I think we can do this in our families too. We can model that love, that gift of self when our kids are hard to love, right? To keep loving them, to admit when we're wrong, allow them to love us in our weakness as well. Of course, in our friendships, for sure. When there's freedom to be yourself, that is the best friendship there is, right?
Yes.
Those are my favorites, like you guys. So it's so much we could sit with. I say that I know I'm always repeating myself, but it's so deep. So the next section goes even more deeply into original innocence. And then we get into like, what part of this are we called to like live out currently? We are past the point of original innocence. We are on the other side of the fall. Like, how are we to know like what of this are we called to continue to discover and to live out? And so John Paul II says, he points out that what Adam and Eve had in the beginning, that original innocence, was unique to them. And we can't go back to living that way exactly. But because of Jesus pointing us to the beginning, what we're doing here is looking for what he calls the permanent roots of the human person that will show us how we are to live. And he says that Adam and Eve, God gave them to each other, but in a sense, God gives us all to each other for all time. It wasn't just the first man and woman that he gave to each other. We're made for communion. We're made to be a gift still. And we have that echo in our hearts of original innocence. And then he goes on to talk about how the relationship between man and woman makes visible the invisible, and that our bodies are able to make visible the invisible, the spiritual and the divine. And I know in the next, all of this, we're going to dig into much more deeply as we continue. He's sort of just like scratching the surface here, honestly. Next season, we'll be talking more about how do we live this out on this side of original sin. We're really going to dive into that much more deeply. But what did you ladies have on your hearts after reading this section?
Well, actually, when I was reading this section, a little joke came to my mind.
Oh, tell it, please.
I wasn't expecting that.
The whole concept of the visible becoming, pointing to the invisible. And it was a little cartoon I saw years ago, and it has this little girl walking down the street with her mom, and then this sister walks by, and the little girl goes, "Look, Mom, there goes the church,"
Aww.
So what is the church? It's not a building, obviously the child knew that, but it's something that's almost invisible to a respect, but it is part of the people of God and everything. But she saw that sister in that picture capitalized for her something that was somewhat invisible. Aww. And I know as a sister, I'm sure this has happened to many sisters. One time I walked into a class and there were little kids there, and one of the little kids says, "Hello, Mrs. God." Well, I'm not exactly Mrs. God, but I felt pretty good about it. Anyway,
you're married to God, so you're Mrs. God.
That totally makes sense.
That's the way they understood it. So they can't see God, but they could see God in me in a certain way. And I thought how beautiful that was. It kind of put me on like, whoa, I have to be on high alert here, really be a good example. But I think how beautiful that is, that God gives us so many ways of expressing the invisible, the spiritual life. We have the sacraments, which of course we have a visible sign of something that is invisible. In our daily lives, we smile at somebody and it shows them, we like them. Just even a certain kind of smile can give encouragement to someone. You nod, someone is hurting and you give them a hug and you don't have to say anything, and it expresses so much love. So I think there's so many things. You walk out in nature and you see creation. You think, how could people not believe in a God, So there are so many ways that God gives us to take that visible element to show something invisible. And as Rochelle said too, God, in creating humanity, God made humanity to speak, in a sense, to shout His goodness, His beauty, His love. And so everything we do will hopefully manifest some truth about God, So I find that something very beautiful, something we need to work on all the time, but it is a calling, is a gift of ours to give to others.
I could ponder that for the rest of the time. So, when we first read this, we made notes after every audience so we could have conversations about it. And so I referenced my notes. It's been a couple of years now, but it's nice to just kind of go back and refresh. And audience 19 was really the audience where I feel like everything started coming together. Like I was finally understanding more in my heart than just like putting all the facts and all of the concepts together. And so I had so many notes about this audience. And I think that the most beautiful thing that I realized through this, and again, it just continues, like you could just ponder the invisible being made visible in us, our bodies, our relationships. I mean, you could just ponder that for so long. And I just kind of was trying to work through it in my head. And luckily I wrote down literally every thought. But as I was digesting it again, I was just thinking about like God was just trying to figure out how to show us His love. And I think we take that for granted all the time when people say, God loves you, God loves you. It almost can seem like yeah, we know everything is horrible in your life right now, but God loves you. Like, just get over it, and you don't really understand like the depth of what that means. And so He really knew that we were like concrete people. We had to like see His love. We couldn't just like be told about His love. And so like He's so clever that He was just like, I know, I will physically show the love between myself, God the Father, and my Son, Jesus, and how it's our love exchange is so huge it creates a third person called the Holy Spirit. I'll just make a mirror image of that by creating a man and a woman. And they'll love each other so much they could also create a third person. And I think that just pondering that, like this is the audience where like that thought came into my mind for the first time. And I just think that that gift exchange in the Trinity and how it's reflected between me and my husband, it just made now thinking back, I probably should have understood all of this before we got married, but it just made that sacrament of marriage and the relationship between my husband and I so much more beautiful and so much more sacred. And every single sacrament that we have in the Catholic Church has a physical sign. Baptism is water. Well, holy matrimony, the physical sign is the man and the woman coming together. And I just think it is just such a beautiful, beautiful gift that we are given, that we are really creating with God his image in the world. And we can make love physically present on earth. And I just think that God wants us to know him so intimately, that this was his gift to us. And the fruits of his love we can literally know by seeing our children. And I just really, just pondering that, just took my relationship with my husband and with God just to a whole nother level.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't have a lot more to say about that. There was one line that stuck out to me that for some reason I didn't notice before, but it was basically that this communion of persons is holiness made visible in the world. I don't know why I didn't notice that before, but that this is how God is showing his holiness, is through this relationship of man and woman, through that reciprocal gift. And we could really sit with that a long time, like you said, the sacredness of that. And it makes me, he even says, like, we're called to both discover this and to defend that freedom of the gift. It's so, so important. And, Christopher West often says that if you want to know what is most sacred, look at what is most defiled in the world and what is most attacked. And we see that in our world, sadly, the attack on marriage and the family. But that's because it is sacred and it is so very holy. And we always have to remember there is a spiritual battle, and that the enemy doesn't want us to know how good we are and the goodness of our bodies and our purpose to be a sincere gift to another. So I just think that's super important to remember that this is something that we need to fight for and continue to share with others about it. So I am so grateful for all of you listeners, and that you continue to journey with us. And please feel free, if you are enjoying this show and the content and you feel like it's important, I just want to encourage you to share it with a friend. If there's someone that you can think of who maybe has a lot of questions about what we're talking about and is just searching, as we all are, please don't be afraid. You never know what God is going to do by you just sharing and offering that to someone. I also just want to remind you to look at our show notes, because that's where we put links to resources. And so I just want to remind you of that as well. But that's really all the time that we have for today. Next episode, we will be discussing General Audiences 20 through 22 on knowledge and procreation. And that is a study on Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. So thank you so much again for listening. And until next episode, God bless. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. We can be reached by email at befilledpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. There you can find additional encouragement in between episodes. Also, be sure to check out our show description for links to resources we discuss in the show, as well as questions for deeper reflection. Until the next episode, God bless.